In a world where fame often hides the truth, few stories unfold as slowly and as painfully as the quiet tragedy behind Chris Tucker's life at 54. While the world remembers his explosive energy, his booming laughter, and the electric speed with which he lit up the screen, behind the camera, time has been much less kind. And now, as Chris Tucker stands in the later chapters of his life, the truth layered in years of silence, sacrifice, heartbreak, and deep personal struggle has come to the surface in ways most people never imagined. So today, we trace the journey of a man who made millions smile, yet carried burdens heavier than most could ever guess. This is the story of Chris Tucker slowed down, entangled, and revealed in its most heartbreaking form. And at 54, the truth is far more tragic than the world ever expected. A slower beginning than expected. When discussing the life of Chris Tucker, most people rush immediately to the big moments, the massive success of Rush Hour, the booming laughter of Friday, or the unforgettable comedic timing that once dominated Hollywood conversations. But to truly understand the tragedy surrounding Chris Tucker at the age of 54, we must begin much earlier, long before fame, long before controversy, and long before the world had any idea who he was. Born on August 31, 1971, in Atlanta, Georgia, Chris Tucker's upbringing was not marked by speed or glamour. In fact, his early life was surprisingly ordinary, slow-paced, steady, and shaped by a quiet sort of Southern discipline. His household was not wealthy, nor was it deeply connected to show business. Instead, it was a place where humor grew gradually, through small family gatherings, quiet church events, and moments where Chris would imitate relatives simply to pass the time. Even as a child, Chris's humor wasn't the loud, high-energy style the world would later know. It evolved slowly, shaped by hours of watching Eddie Murphy's stand-up routines, Richard Pryor's films, and the subtle rhythms of everyday people living ordinary lives. This slow organic development would become one of the most defining patterns of Chris Tucker's entire career. Nothing in his life happened quickly, not fame, not success, and certainly not the tragedies that came later. As we move deeper into his story, it becomes clear that Chris Tucker's life was built on a foundation of gradual progression, and the tragedies that would later emerge in his adulthood were also the result of years of slow, painful build-up. The long road to early comedy. Chris Tucker's introduction to comedy wasn't explosive. It wasn't marked by a viral moment, a famous audition, or a sudden breakthrough. Instead, it came in the form of small steps, local events, small clubs, dimly lit corners of Atlanta where comedians performed to crowds that were often half asleep. Audiences were not always enthusiastic. Some nights, crowds barely reacted. Many nights, Chris performed for far less money than the bus ride home cost him.
Yet he kept going, not because success seemed inevitable, but because comedy, for him, felt like the only thing that moved his life forward even at a slow pace. These early experiences shaped Chris in ways the public rarely sees. They built patience, humility, and resilience, but they also planted seeds of emotional exhaustion that would later grow into something much darker. When Chris eventually made his way to Los Angeles, it wasn't because Hollywood was calling his name. It was because he felt he needed to try. Even if the results were uncertain, inconsistent, and painfully slow. Hollywood takes notice, but not all at Onsamani fans assume that Chris Tucker became a star overnight. But that wasn't the case. His arrival in LA led to small performances at local comedy clubs. Many nights, he waited hours for a chance to get on stage, only to perform for less than 5 minutes. There was no immediate applause from industry insiders. No instant fame. No massive breakthrough. Instead, there were rejections, long waits, quiet setbacks, and moments where Chris wondered if he had made a mistake coming to Hollywood at all. But as time passed slowly, almost painfully slowly, someone finally noticed him. Not in a grand, dramatic fashion, but simply as one talented young comedian among many. His early roles in shows like Def Comedy Jam introduced him to the world, but even then, Hollywood wasn't fully convinced. While audiences laughed, executives watched with cautious curiosity. They saw potential, but they didn't see a star yet. Friday, a quiet breakthrough with loud consequence when Chris Tucker was cast as Smokey in the 1995 film Friday. He wasn't selected because he had achieved massive fame. He was chosen because he was funny, affordable, and genuinely talented. Nobody involved in the project imagined it would become one of the most iconic comedies in American culture. Chris's performance was brilliant, but behind the scenes, things were far from glamorous. He was paid just $10,000 for the role, a number that would come back to haunt him decades later. But at the time, the amount seemed reasonable, because nobody knew how impactful Friday would become. And yet, while the world laughed, Chris himself remained unchanged. His life didn't suddenly shift into luxury. He didn't become wealthy overnight. He didn't suddenly rise to the top of Hollywood. Instead, the success of Friday created new pressures, expectations, and comparisons that slowly began weighing on him. What the audience perceived as a massive leap was, in Chris's reality, just another small, slow step forward. And emotionally, he wasn't prepared for what came next. The Rush Hour era. A blessing and a burden. When Chris Tucker joined the cast of Rush Hour in 1998, alongside Jackie Chan, he entered a new world, one filled with fame, fortune, and global recognition. But even then, his rise was not as sudden as the public imagines.
Rush Hour was expected to perform well, but not to become the worldwide sensation it ultimately did. Chris Tucker's comedic timing, paired with Jackie Chan's action brilliance, created a formula that seemed almost magical. Suddenly, Chris was thrust into the spotlight, the center of attention, the man whose high-pitched voice and rapid-fire delivery became instantly recognizable. But behind the smiles, Chris was overwhelmed. The pressure to outperform himself with each sequel grew heavier with time. The money increased dramatically, especially with Rush Hour 3, where he famously earned $25 million, but so did the emotional cost. Expectations mounted. People demanded more. Studios demanded more. Life demanded more. And slowly, Chris Tucker began to break under the weight. Fame, as it turns out, does not arrive gently. It arrives in waves, loud, forceful waves that crash over everything. And Chris, who had always lived a slower-paced life, struggled to keep up. The sudden silence. Why Chris Tucker disappeared after Rush Hour 3? Chris Tucker seemed to vanish. For many fans, it felt like he disappeared overnight. But like everything else in his life, the disappearance wasn't sudden. It was slow. A series of small decisions, small disappointments, small moments of fatigue, small cracks in his emotional armor, eventually becoming a complete withdrawal from the spotlight. Chris began stepping away from Hollywood for several reasons: creative exhaustion, emotional burnout, spiritual reflection, financial mismanagement, active industry pressures, and by one, these issues pulled him further from the career that had once defined him. And gradually, Chris drifted into a life of silence, a life where he appeared rarely, spoke rarely, and worked even more rarely. To the world, this seemed like a mystery, but to Chris, it was simply the result of years of accumulated stress. And by age 54, the effect of all those years had grown heavier than ever. Financial trouble, a slow descent into debt. Tucker's tax issues are often discussed publicly, but few understand how they truly unfolded. It wasn't because he was extravagant or reckless. It wasn't because he lived an extreme lifestyle. Instead, it was a slow, gradual accumulation of mismanagement, misunderstandings, and poor financial guidance. By the time the public learned about his tax debt, the problem had already grown far larger than Chris could manage. And while the world reacted with shock, Chris reacted with quiet resignation. The emotional toll of these financial struggles weighed heavily on him. His career was slowing down. His opportunities were shrinking. His sense of peace was fading. And this was only one part of the tragedy. Personal struggles and emotional isolation. As Chris reached his 50s, he faced something far more painful than financial problems: deep emotional isolation. His career was not what it once was. His fame had slowly faded. His friends had moved on, and his once bright future now felt uncertain. While fans believed he was choosing silence, much of it was actually a result of emotional exhaustion. At 54, Chris Tucker found himself in a place few expected. not consistently working yet fully present in Hollywood, not surrounded by the crowds of friends he once had, yet financially comfortable, not creatively fulfilled. In the saddest part, the world barely noticed. This quiet emotional decline is part of what makes Chris Tucker's story so tragic. His laughter entertained millions. Yet when he needed support, true emotional support, very few were there. A life slowed down to a standstill today. At 54, Chris Tucker's life moves at a slower pace than ever. While he occasionally performs stand-up, appears in interviews, or reunites with old friends like Jackie Chan, his life is no longer driven by Hollywood. Instead, it is marked by reflection, regressities. These transitions have not been easy. The tragedy isn't that Chris Tucker lost fame. The tragedy is that he lost momentum, and with that momentum, he lost a part of himself. The deepest part of the tragedy, perhaps the most heartbreaking reality about Chris Tucker at age 54 is this. He gave the world joy, but the world did not give him the same joy in return. He sacrificed opportunities for moral and spiritual reasons. He walked away from roles that could have made him a billionaire. He avoided projects that conflicted with his beliefs. He stepped back from Hollywood rather than compromise his values. And while his choices were admirable, they came with consequences, slow, painful consequences that eventually shaped a tragic chapter in his life. The tragedy of Chris Tucker is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not explosive. It is slow, quiet, gradual, and deeply human.